Come see us on tour in Dallas, Austin, Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, New York, Atlantic City, Levittown, Cohost, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for the link for the cheapest tickets. So, you talked about debanking, and Mark Andreessen went on Joe Rogan recently and talked about how his debanking and the debanking of people, which comes from places like billionaires, right? So PayPal can just kick you off. They could debank you, which they've done. Same thing with Patreon. Same thing with all of them. They can just debank you. You've been debanked. So, but Mark Andreessen made the case that was coming from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which they actually fight against that sort of thing. And so now Elon's going after. I think he's doing great work with USAID, and I'm all for his auditing of the Pentagon and the Treasury Department, but he's pretending that Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is somehow a nefarious group, and they're actually the only thing in the government that's looking out for the regular worker, the regular Joe, and trying to protect them from things like debanking. And what do you say to that?
Well, first off, I think they're going to, the Doge guys are going after, they have a big mandate, a writ to go after all this. And we'll talk about in a second how it ties back to reality of the budgeting process. The consumer, which I think, look, the payday lending, there were some horrible abuses. I think there's arguments on both sides. One, does it actually restrict credit to people and what it's actually done to protect people? I do think there's arguments to keep parts of it. There's arguments to take down parts of it. They're going to go through and do an audit. All that eventually is going to have to come back through Congress. I think you're seeing this. They put a budget out today. That's a 10-year budget. It's a joke on the math, but it doesn't have any Doge elements in it. I mean, all this thing Doge is doing and saying they're going to get $1 trillion in cuts a year, which we need. I don't happen to think it's that much waste, fraud, and abuse. There is some. I think they've already found some. And there may be more incompetence than we even know. We need to get to the bottom of that and root it out. I do think that the only way you're going to get these budget deficits under control, and if you don't get them under control, you're not going to get inflation under control, is that you have to do major programmatic cuts. And I think those programmatic cuts have to start the Defense Department. You have to cross the Potomac and get into the Defense Department. Until you go to the Defense Department, and let's leave waste, fraud, and abuse aside and the fact they haven't been able to get an audit done in decades. I'm just talking programmatically, and particularly how it lines up with President Trump's kind of rethinking of our strategy, which is now a hemispheric strategy. He's kind of laying out that, and Rubio talked about this, the end of the post-war rules-based international order means that you don't need the United States from NATO to the Middle East to the Malacca Straits and South China Sea and then up to Korea and Japan. The United States doesn't need to be everywhere. We take care of this hemisphere from the Panama Canal to Greenland and kind of block the Russian Navy up there, which it will, and cut off the Chinese Navy to get into the Gulf of America from the Pacific. You have a kind of a Monroe Doctrine 2.0. You had Bolsonaro in Brazil, Milei in Argentina. You've secured the hemisphere. You add Canada, or even if you don't, you have some sort of partnership with Alaska. You got Alaska, Greenland, and you got Canada. You're at the Arctic, which is going to be the new great game of the 21st century between China, Russia, and the United States. My point is, you have a total hemispheric. You're totally hemispherically secured. You take the island chains in the Pacific, and you've secured the United States of America from any real attacks. You put an Iron Dome on it, anti-ballistic missile. I'm good to go. Then we're hermetically sealed, essentially, against the rest of the world. Not perfectly, but a lot more than we are today, which is about 2%. So you do that. Your priorities can change in defense. We can't spend right now. It's $900 billion, the NDA for defense, NDAA. And I will tell people it's really $1 trillion because they hide other costs everywhere. And the budget they put out today, they got 100. There's a thing out with $170 billion additional for DHS, I think it is, for the invasion of the southern border, to seal the border, but to do the mass deportation. $175 billion. Think of that ticket. There's another $100 billion in defense added on to the $900 billion we're spending. We just can't do it. We're at 3.5% of GDP on our defense spending, and it just can't continue. And I come at this from a guy that I was 7.5, 8 years as a naval officer. 3.5, 4 years at sea on a combatant on a destroyer back at the Pentagon. My daughter's a West Point grad. She served with the 101st Airborne in Iraq. So we're not doves. I'm kind of a hawk, but I consider myself rational in about how you go about this. And if we're serious about cutting this budget, we have to cross the Pentagon, or have to cross the Potomac and start at the Pentagon.
And so that's what Panama and the Greenland was all about. So Panama was about getting Chinese out of the Panama Canal, and Greenland was about securing it from Russia?
So if you take, it's like Alfred Lord Mahan, the great theoretician that the British based their naval strategy on. It's if you take the Panama Canal and you block the ability of the Chinese and the Russian Navy ever to team up, and you go all the way up the East Coast of the thing, and you go Greenland can block the Russian Navy, particularly the submarines, the fast attack and the ballistic missile submarines from coming out of Murmansk and Archangel in the Arctic and coming down past Greenland and between Greenland and Iceland, right there in that slot. With the United States, you build a base right there. You put hunter-killer aircraft. You put fast attack submarines. You bottle them up. Right now, we have sonar buoys and sophisticated. There's also classified, but non-classified. The sonar buoys, you can track them and trail them. Here, you can bottle them up. You bottle up the Russian Navy, and you've secured the United States. You put an Iron Dome on it, and that's kind of expensive, and technologically we can't get there. But you've got the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. You've secured the southern border. Now you got this issue in the Arctic, because that's going to be this, like the Great Game was in Afghanistan in the 19th century. It's a great power struggle up there as China's up there. Russia's spending all their time and money up there. The Arctic is going to be and this is one of the reasons Canada has to take seriously some sort of partnership. President Trump wants to state, but some sort of partnership with the United States, because now their greatest barrier, the Arctic North, is now their softest underbelly of exposure to a great power struggle, where the United States having Alaska and some sort of partnership with Greenland, which I think we will get. You add Canada and we can just block it up there. So it's a naval strategy. This is why when President Trump announced it, he's thought this thing through, I think, pretty well. The NATO countries, I said at the time, weeks ago, I said they better take the signal here, not the noise, because we're telling them the Russian army's your problem. We're not a continental power. We bailed you out in World War I. We came back and bailed you out again in World War II. We bailed you out again in the Cold War. We're done. The Ukraine thing's a disaster. We never should have been involved. We're done. The Russian army's your problem. And Pete Hegseth said today, I think in Munich at the security conference, he says, hey, Europe's got to understand European defense security is not a high priority for the United States. They're an ally. We don't want to be a protectorate or a vassal state. So we can get to it, but it's not a high priority. A high priority is securing the homeland. And President Trump is laying out a pretty serious plan. I would also tell your listeners, he's not kidding. He's not trolling people. When he talks about the Panama Canal, the Chinese Communist Party came down there and bought off the elites like they do. It's predatory capitalism. They had all the things in Chinese. The people were getting screwed. The people down there want us back. President Trump's going to take back the Panama Canal. That no doubt. And the Chinese Navy is not going to be sailing through there. The Greenland situation, he's absolutely serious in this. He talked about this in the first term. In fact, I think he had Ron Lauder, the executive, try to work a deal the first time with the Danes. So he's very serious about it. He's talked about this ever since I've known him. He's been obsessed with Greenland, and particularly naval warfare, and using a naval strategy to protect the United States of America, which is kind of, we were a naval power in World War II. Canada, he's very serious about that. If you look at geoeconomically and the tariffs we announced yesterday on the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, that's just part one. He looks at the United States as a premium market that the little guy is kind of supported and built over time. And he looks at it like you would look at buying a box at a sporting event or a front row ticket in a concert. It's a premium market. You got to pay a premium price. He doesn't look at tariffs like a 25% tariff on a Mexican avocado. That's an old way of thinking. Number one, he thinks it's a premium market. You should pay for that privilege to get in here. And the only way you don't pay is you put your manufacturing right here and you hire American citizens for those jobs. I think that's pretty revolutionary. This is why this concept of external revenue, he keeps talking about McKinley. Hamilton was called the American Plan. The founders of our nation, who are protectionists like Hamilton, had this plan called the American System or the American Plan, with very high protective tariffs to make sure that our manufacturing base could start to grow. And up until the financial crisis of 1907, when shortly thereafter we went to the Internal Revenue Service and really put all the revenue generation to run the government on corporations and or American citizens. Up until then, everything was essentially paid for by tariffs, fees, and duties. And this is why he keeps talking about McKinley. It's one of the reasons he renamed Mount Denali Mount McKinley, because he's a big fan of McKinley's. And he looks at this budget deficit, when you're talking $2 trillion, in President Trump's mind, he sees $1 trillion. Now, it may be a grossly ambitious number, but he sees $1 trillion coming in annually as external revenue from people trying to get into this market, or putting manufacturing here where we're getting the benefits of that manufacturing to lower the deficit. And people should know that he's not trolling people. He's very serious about Canada, very serious about Greenland. He's very serious about the Panama Canal.
Well, I mean, I've seen stories about companies in Canada already, when he was threatening the tariff, that they were going to open up manufacturing in the United States because of it. So that just kind of bolsters what you're saying about it. Come see us on tour in Dallas, Austin, Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, New York, Atlantic City, Levittown, Cohost, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for the link for the cheapest tickets.